The cafe buzzed with chatter when it happened. A grease-stained single dad, working the night shift to feed his little girl, scribbled a delivery plan on a napkin just to quiet the ideas buzzing in his head. Seconds later, a powerful CEO spotted it and laughed in his face. Cameras caught the humiliation, her voice slicing the air. Stick to serving coffee. What neither of them knew was that the napkin would soon save her empire $40 million and change all their lives forever. The morning rush at Maple Street Cafe had always been a blur of clinking mugs, the hiss of espresso machines, and the quiet shuffle of worn shoes across the tiled floor. For Ethan Miller, the rhythm was second nature. By day he was a grease-stained mechanic, but by evening he pulled on a faded apron and worked the cafe's night shift. Every dollar mattered when you were raising an 8-year-old daughter alone. His hands, once meant for drafting blueprints, now carried trays of lattes and pastries. Still, he carried himself with quiet dignity, because Sophie's smile waiting at home made every tired bone worth it. That night the cafe was busier than usual. A group swept in with the air of people too important for the room. Sleek suits, gleaming phones, voices pitched just loud enough for everyone to know they were powerful. At the center was Amelia Harrington, the kind of CEO whose name appeared in the business pages like clockwork, flanked by executives who trailed her like satellites orbiting a sun. They chose a corner booth and spread out papers, laptops, and charts, transforming the cozy cafe into a boardroom. Ethan kept his head down as he served them water and cappuccinos, but he couldn't help catching fragments of their conversation. Words like distribution bottleneck, logistics overhaul, and $40 million deficit floated through the air. He set down a saucer and lingered a second too long, his ears tuning in without meaning to. As Amelia scribbled notes and her team debated heatedly, Ethan felt an itch he hadn't felt in years. His mind started mapping possibilities, sketching routes and loops in his head like old times at university when he dreamed of designing efficient systems. Almost without thinking, he pulled a napkin from the counter and with the stub of a pencil from his apron began to draw. A looped delivery system, streamlined checkpoints, a simple rotation that minimized backtracking. His fingers moved fast, memory guiding them more than logic. It was nothing fancy, just lines and arrows on a napkin, but it felt alive in his hand, like the echo of the engineer he once was. Sophie appeared at his side, climbing onto a stool with her sketchbook clutched to her chest. "Daddy, what's that?" she whispered, peering at the messy lines. Ethan gave a small smile. "Just an idea, sweetheart. Nothing important." But as he carried another tray past the executives, Amelia's sharp eyes caught the napkin in his hand. "What's that?" she asked, her tone half curious, half dismissive. Ethan froze, embarrassed, but under her piercing gaze, he set the napkin on the edge of the table. "It's just something I thought of. A simpler route." One of the executives leaned over, scanning the scribbles, and let out a laugh. "A delivery model from our waiter? That's cute." The others chuckled, and Amelia smirked. "I suppose everyone thinks they're an expert these days." "Thank you, but we'll stick to the professionals." Her words landed like stones. Heat rose in Ethan's face as the laughter echoed. He wanted to snatch the napkin back, to erase the mistake of thinking his voice had any place in their world. His hand trembled as he reached for it. Before he could crumple it, Sophie slipped off her stool and gently pressed her small hand over his. Her eyes, wide and unwavering, looked up at him. "Don't throw it away, Daddy," she said softly, but clearly enough that Amelia heard. "Maybe they'll need it one day." The cafe went quiet for a heartbeat, the hum of machines and chatter muffled by the innocence in her voice. Ethan swallowed hard, torn between shame and the fragile spark of hope in his daughter's eyes. He tucked the napkin into his pocket, bowed slightly, and retreated toward the counter. Behind him, the executives resumed their chatter, their laughter washing over him again. But Sophie's words lingered, weaving through the ache in his chest. He wiped a counter with a cloth that trembled in his hands, trying to shake the humiliation. He'd once been a man with plans and potential, now reduced to being the butt of a joke. Yet in that moment, with his daughter's hand still warm in his, he felt a strange pull, the stubborn ember of the man who used to believe ideas mattered. He said nothing more that night, but Sophie leaned against his side and whispered. Mom would have been proud. The words pierced him, both tender and sharp. He blinked hard, hiding the sting in his eyes as he whispered back, "Finish your cocoa, kiddo." Outside, the city pulsed with neon and noise, oblivious to what had just been dismissed as a joke. But in the quiet corner of a modest cafe, a napkin sketch sat folded in a pocket, carrying the weight of humiliation and the seed of a future no one yet imagined. Ethan left the cafe that night carrying not only his daughter's hand, but also the sting of laughter echoing in his ears. He told himself it didn't matter. He had bills to pay, a daughter to raise, and no space left for pride. Still, the napkin lay folded in his pocket, warm against his chest, as though it carried more than ink. He didn't know that Sophie, sensing his hurt, had carefully tucked a copy of the sketch into her little notebook, filled with crayon drawings and doodles of bicycles and houses. She always believed her father's ideas were treasures, even when the world mocked them. Long after Sophie had fallen asleep that night, Ethan sat by the small desk in their apartment, staring at the tools scattered across it. Wrenches and bolts mixed with dog-eared notebooks filled with sketches he hadn't shared with anyone. Once upon a time, those notebooks had been his lifeline. At 20, he was a top student in engineering, working on a research project about adaptive delivery systems with his college sweetheart, who later became his wife. They dreamed of building something that could change the way goods moved across cities. But life had cut that dream short when her diagnosis came, sharp and merciless. He had walked away from scholarships and labs to take a job that barely covered medical bills. By the time she passed, their dreams had been reduced to boxes of unfinished sketches. He never regretted choosing her, but he carried the hollow ache of what might have been. Back at the cafe, fate was already setting another thread in motion. A young man named Daniel, one of Amelia's junior analysts, had forgotten his laptop charger that night. When he returned the next morning, the barista handed him a stack of papers and napkins left on the table. Among them was Ethan's sketch, stained faintly with coffee. Daniel almost tossed it, but something about the neat loops and arrows caught his eye. On a whim, he took it back to the office. During lunch, curiosity got the better of him, and he fed the pattern into a simulation tool. His eyes widened as the model stabilized. The system cut redundancies by nearly 30%. Numbers flashed across the screen, millions in potential savings. He ran it again. The results held. He tried a third time, adjusting parameters, and the pattern still worked. The messy napkin doodle was no joke. Daniel carried the printout to Amelia's office, his heart thumping. She scanned it with a raised brow. "What is this?" Napkin sketch," Daniel admitted, flushing. "From the waiter last night. I ran it through the simulator." Amelia's laugh was sharp, incredulous. "You're telling me a single dad with a coffee pot just solved a $40 million problem my best team hasn't cracked in months?" But the numbers were undeniable. For the first time in weeks, the models pointed toward a viable solution. Amelia's confidence wavered, irritation mixing with intrigue. "Run the projections again. If it holds, bring me the source." She said it with the cool detachment of a CEO. But when Daniel left, she lingered on the printout, tracing the lines. At the bottom corner of the sketch was a tiny heart symbol, drawn faintly as if almost an afterthought. Amelia tilted her head. It wasn't a child's doodle, it was deliberate. She had seen symbols like that before in old design drafts where teams left subtle marks to claim ownership. For reasons she couldn't explain, that small heart unsettled her. That evening, Amelia sat alone in her office long after everyone had gone. The city lights glittered outside, but her gaze remained fixed on the napkin drawing. She thought about the man she had mocked, the quiet dignity in his eyes even as laughter crushed him. She thought about the child who had stood beside him, clutching his hand with absolute faith. Against her will, an unease crept into her chest. Was it possible that the solution her empire desperately needed came not from her million-dollar consultants, but from a man who swept tables and wiped counters? Pride bristled in her. Amelia Harrington was not someone who bent easily, especially not to the idea that brilliance could come from outside her carefully curated circle. Yet the evidence was too strong. The system worked. And whether she liked it or not, it bore the signature of someone who had clearly thought deeply about logistics. For Ethan, the days after the cafe humiliation were ordinary long shifts at the garage. Late nights with Sophie's homework, dinners of grilled cheese and soup. He had no idea that elsewhere, his discarded napkin had sparked a revelation. He didn't know his idea was already running through the veins of a billion-dollar company's software models. All he knew was that Sophie kept drawing loops and arrows in her sketchbook and whispering, "One day, Daddy, they'll see." He smiled at her faith but shook his head. The world didn't work that way, or so he thought. On a gray Saturday morning, the streets still damp from last night's rain, Amelia Harrington found herself walking up the narrow path to Ethan Miller's modest home. It was a far cry from the glass towers she usually inhabited, peeling paint on the porch, wind chimes made from mismatched spoons, and a small garden where dandelions pushed stubbornly through the soil. She almost turned back, pride urging her to avoid the humility of this errand, but the napkin sketch folded in her purse burned like a challenge. She had to know if the man she had ridiculed was truly the mind behind the design saving her company. Sophie answered the door before Amelia could knock twice. The girl's face lit with recognition, though she quickly grew shy, half hiding behind the frame. "You're the lady from the cafe," she said softly. Amelia crouched down, her sharp business demeanor faltering. "Yes. Is your dad home?" Moments later, Ethan appeared, wiping oil from his hands with an old rag. He froze at the sight of her, suspicion tightening his jaw. "What do you want?" His tone wasn't rude, just guarded, the voice of a man accustomed to being underestimated. Inside, the house was cluttered but alive. Children's drawings plastered the fridge, model cars lined the shelves, and the faint scent of motor oil lingered beneath the aroma of cinnamon toast. Amelia noticed the small desk by the window stacked with notebooks. Sophie dashed to it, retrieving a folded napkin with pride. "This," she announced, handing it to Amelia. "Daddy said it was nothing. But I knew it was something big." Her innocent certainty struck Amelia harder than any boardroom debate. She unfolded the paper. It was the same sketch, but now surrounded by Sophie's colorful doodles. In the margin, Amelia noticed faint pencil imprints beneath Ethan's lines, a layering of thoughts over time. "Why did you draw this?" she asked, her voice softer now. Ethan shrugged. "Old habit. Ideas don't stop just because you stop chasing them. But it's nothing you people would take seriously." As Amelia pressed, Ethan finally let the wall crack. He told her about his past years as a promising engineering student, the night he walked away from scholarships to sit beside his wife through chemo treatments, the bitterness of watching a professor claim credit for ideas he'd contributed to but never got to publish. "I learned my place," he said quietly. "Dreams don't put food on the table. Sophie does." The words carried both resignation and fierce love. Amelia listened, something inside her shifting. She had always measured worth by achievement, yet here was a man who had sacrificed his brilliance for love, for loyalty, for family. As her eyes wandered the room, she caught sight of an old leather-bound notebook lying half open. Pages brimmed with detailed diagrams, equations, and delivery models more advanced than anything her team had drafted. She picked it up carefully, scanning the meticulous designs. Ethan stiffened. "That's private," he said, reaching to take it back, but not before she noticed the same small heart symbol in the corner of multiple pages. "This mark," she asked, "what does it mean?" His voice cracked when he answered, It was hers, my wife. She used to add it when we worked on things together. Said it was our signature. He closed the notebook, his hands lingering over the worn cover. These are just memories now, nothing more. For Amelia, the revelation was staggering. Not only had Ethan produced the system currently propping up her company, but he had been quietly building solutions for years, unseen and uncredited. Worse still, she realized some of the company's existing models bore eerie resemblance to sketches in his notebooks. Could it be that his stolen ideas had once seeded the empire she now led? A pang of guilt gnawed at her pride. She had mocked him in public, yet in his private world he was a giant whose shoulders carried not just his daughter, but the weight of ideas that could change industries. Sophie climbed onto her father's lap, wrapping small arms around his neck. "He doesn't like to talk about it," she confided to Amelia, "but Daddy can fix anything." The child's faith made Amelia's throat tighten. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar: humility. She had spent her life believing power came from titles, wealth, and control. But in this small home, surrounded by crayons and oil stains, she saw a different kind of power, resilience born of sacrifice, brilliance tempered by love. And it unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. When she left that afternoon, the rain had started again, soft and persistent. She carried more than a napkin sketch now. She carried the weight of truth that the future of her company, perhaps even her own redemption, rested not in her boardroom but in the quiet genius of a single dad she had once humiliated. The following weeks were a storm inside Harrington Logistics. Numbers on quarterly reports plummeted, shareholders panicked, and rumors of a hostile takeover swirled through the city's business pages. Amelia Harrington sat at the head of the mahogany boardroom table, her posture as rigid as the steel skyline behind her, but inside she was fraying. For the first time in her career, the board was openly questioning her ability to lead. An international conglomerate circled like a shark, offering to buy the company for a fraction of its worth. If she didn't produce a miracle, everything her family had built could vanish. She thought of the napkin sketch folded neatly in her desk drawer. She thought of Ethan, the man she had once dismissed, and of Sophie's unwavering voice. "Daddy can fix anything." The words haunted her. At the emergency shareholder meeting, tension crackled like static. Rows of suits filled the vast conference hall, cameras from financial networks trained on the podium. Reporters whispered about imminent collapse, waiting for blood. Amelia stood with her notes trembling slightly in her hands, but she made a decision she had never made before, to tell the unvarnished truth. "We've been losing millions," she admitted, her voice steady. Gasps and murmurs rose. "But a solution exists. One that has already proven capable of saving us $40 million in annual costs." A bold slide illuminated the massive screen, a digital rendering of Ethan's system, refined but unmistakable. The room fell into stunned silence. A board member leaned forward, his voice dripping skepticism. "And who exactly designed this?" Amelia paused, pride warring with honesty. Then she exhaled. "Not me, not my consultants. A single father working nights in a cafe. His name is Ethan Miller." Laughter rippled uneasily across the hall. Some scoffed, others shook their heads. A reporter's voice pierced the silence. "Are you telling us your company's future rests on the doodles of a waiter?" Amelia's jaw tightened. "I am telling you that genius has no title, that innovation doesn't wear a suit, and that the man you mock has already saved us when none of us could." Ethan, sitting in the audience with Sophie clutching his hand, wanted nothing more than to disappear. His heart pounded as cameras turned toward him. Amelia gestured. "Mr. Miller, would you join us?" He shook his head, but Sophie tugged free, walking bravely to the stage. The hall fell silent as her small voice echoed through the microphone. "My dad always fixes what's broken. He fixed my bike. He fixes our old car. He even fixed my heart when Mommy died. If he says this will work, I believe him. Maybe you should too. Tears pricked Ethan's eyes as he hurried to her side, the room holding its breath. He crouched, whispering, "You didn't have to," but she whispered back, "Yes, I did." Standing before the crowd, Ethan's hands trembled, but he unfolded one of his old notebooks, pages worn and smudged. He explained in plain language how the system worked: fewer backtracks, tighter loops, smarter checkpoints. He didn't speak like a professor or a CEO. He spoke like a father teaching a child how to ride a bike, clear, patient, certain. Graphs flashed behind him as Daniel, the young analyst, ran the models live. The numbers soared, undeniable. Whispered doubt turned to stunned silence. Finally, one shareholder stood and clapped. Another followed. Soon the hall filled with applause, hesitant at first, then thunderous. Amelia watched, her throat tight. For the first time in years, she felt something break open inside her: humility, respect, even hope. She saw Ethan not as the invisible man she had mocked, but as a partner, someone who carried brilliance in silence because life had demanded sacrifice. The board voted. The deal with the conglomerate was rejected. The company would adopt Ethan's system immediately. The headlines the next morning screamed, "Single Dad Saves Fortune 500 Firm with Napkin Sketch." Cameras camped outside Ethan's garage. Journalists clamored for interviews, but he brushed them off. His world was Sophie, her homework, and the modest dinners they shared. That night, Amelia found herself at Ethan's doorstep once more. "You saved more than a company," she admitted, her voice softer than he had ever heard. "You reminded me what matters. Not pride, not image truth." For the first time, Ethan met her gaze without suspicion. "I didn't do it for you," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I did it for her." Sophie peeked from behind him, smiling. And in that fragile moment, under the porch light, Amelia felt the edges of her iron shell give way. Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding, a recognition of wounds carried and resilience earned. The weeks after the shareholder meeting unfolded like a whirlwind. Harrington Logistics implemented Ethan's design, and within months the numbers spoke for themselves. Costs plummeted, efficiency soared, and the company's future was no longer a question mark, but a headline of triumph. Reporters couldn't resist the story. A single dad, once mocked for a napkin sketch, had saved a Fortune 500 firm $40 million. Cameras lingered on Amelia's boardroom speeches, but she always redirected credit. "Innovation belongs to Ethan Miller," she declared more than once. Her words reverberated across the industry, a rare admission from someone who had built her career on control. For Ethan, the sudden spotlight was bewildering. He refused the television interviews, the glossy magazine profiles. His world was still the grease-stained garage, Sophie's school projects, and late-night grilled cheese dinners. But life had shifted. Amelia insisted he serve as a technical advisor, offering a generous salary and access to research facilities. Ethan hesitated. "I don't want Sophie growing up thinking money is the answer to everything," he told her. "She should know love and integrity come first." Amelia surprised him by nodding. "Then teach her that, while also teaching the world your ideas." A few weeks later, at a press conference unveiling the new system, Amelia unveiled something else: a scholarship fund named after Ethan's late wife, Emily. The fund would support students from difficult backgrounds, ensuring that no promising mind would have to abandon their dreams for survival. Ethan stood frozen as she announced it, Sophie squeezing his hand. The room erupted in applause, but Ethan's eyes filled with tears, not for the recognition, but for the quiet dignity of seeing Emily's name honored. "You didn't have to do that," he murmured to Amelia afterward. "I did," she replied, "because your sacrifice shouldn't be forgotten." At Harrington's headquarters, the napkin that started it all was framed and mounted in the lobby. Beneath it, in clean silver letters, a plaque read, "Every great rescue begins with a simple act of love." Employees and visitors paused before it, reminded that genius can come from the most ordinary places. For Ethan, it was humbling, a reminder of how something scrawled between coffee orders had become a symbol of perseverance and redemption. Yet beyond the boardrooms and headlines, a quieter story was unfolding. Ethan, Amelia, and Sophie found themselves drawn together, not in the glare of publicity, but in small, tender ways. Amelia joined them at the park on Sundays, Sophie tugging both their hands as if it were the most natural thing in the world. At first, Amelia seemed out of place among picnic blankets and swing sets, but gradually the sharp edges of her armor softened. She laughed more freely, sometimes even burned pancakes in Ethan's tiny kitchen, and Sophie teased her with childlike affection. Ethan watched, surprised by how easily the rhythms of family life began to include her. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in hues of violet and gold, they sat on the porch together. Sophie dozed against Ethan's shoulder while Amelia leaned quietly on the other side. The silence wasn't awkward, it was healing. "You gave me back something I didn't know I lost," Amelia said softly. "Hope." Ethan looked at her, the memory of humiliation at the cafe still etched in his mind, but no longer bitter. "You gave me back something too," he replied. "A chance to believe that maybe my ideas weren't buried forever." Their eyes met, not in a grand declaration, but in a quiet acknowledgement that healing was possible together. The legacy of the napkin lived far beyond the numbers. It was in the students who applied for the Emily Miller Scholarship, their letters filled with gratitude. It was in the warehouse workers whose jobs were saved when the company rebounded. It was in Sophie's laughter, brighter now, as she grew up knowing her father's brilliance was real and recognized. And it was in Amelia, who found in Ethan and Sophie a reflection of the family she had lost long ago, and a reminder that leadership wasn't about pride, but about people. Months later, as autumn leaves scattered across the park, Ethan watched Sophie run ahead, her hair catching the light. Amelia stood beside him, her hand brushing his, not with urgency but with quiet certainty. In that moment, Ethan realized the napkin had given them more than a system or salvation. It had given them a future. A single scrap of paper, born of love and sacrifice, had become a bridge between grief and hope, loneliness and family. And as Sophie's laughter echoed across the park, Ethan smiled, knowing that sometimes the smallest lines drawn in silence could redraw the entire map of a life. From a wrinkled napkin in a crowded cafe to the framed symbol of a company's rebirth, Ethan's story reminds us that greatness often hides in ordinary places. A single dad who once carried only grease on his hands carried two. An idea born of love and sacrifice. A legacy that saved an empire and built a family. What began in humiliation ended in hope, proving that even the smallest act of faith can rewrite a future. Perhaps the next world-changing idea is waiting in the quiet resilience of someone overlooked. Do you believe in second chances? Share your thoughts below, and if this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next tale of courage, love, and redemption. Together, let's keep these soul-stirring stories alive.